Hi everyone, welcome back to IELTS Time. Today we're looking at the cue card. Describe a tall building you like or dislike. You should say what it is used for, where it is, what it looks like, and explain why you like or dislike it. As always, let's start with Finn's response.
I'd like to talk about an apartment building that's only about a 10-minute walk from my university. It's not a famous landmark or anything, but I've always liked it because it has a really clean, modern design. As you'd expect, it's mainly used as a residential building. I think there are around 20 or 25 floors, and the ground floor has a small convenience store and a cafe, which makes it pretty convenient for the people who live there. From the outside, it's mostly covered in glass and light gray panels, so it has a simple, contemporary look. It isn't flashy, but it looks well maintained, and there are quite a few trees and benches around the entrance, which make the whole area feel welcoming. At night, the lights from the apartments give the building a warm atmosphere instead of making it feel cold or overly commercial. The reason I like it is that it represents the kind of place I'd like to live after I graduate. Right now, I'm living in student housing, which is fairly basic, so whenever I walk past that building, I imagine what it would be like to have my own apartment with a nice view of the city. It also seems to have a really good location because it's close to campus, public transportation, supermarkets, and restaurants, so you could easily get around without needing a car. Overall, I wouldn't say it's an architecturally impressive building, but I think it's a great example of a comfortable place to live. It's practical, attractive without being over the top, and every time I pass by it, it reminds me of the kind of lifestyle I'm hoping to have in a few years.
That was Finn's response. Let's break down Finn's response and look at how he develops his ideas for each part of the cue card. Let's start with the first point, what it is used for. Finn begins by explaining that the building's mainly residential. He says it's mainly used as a residential building. This directly answers the question, but he doesn't stop there. He adds details about the ground floor, mentioning a convenience store and a cafe. These small details help the listener imagine the building more clearly and make the description feel more personal. The next point is where it is. Finn says, it's only about a 10-minute walk from my university. Instead of just saying the location, he connects it to his daily life as a student. This is a useful way to make a location description more natural because it explains why the place is familiar to him. For the appearance of the building, Finn gives several specific details. He describes it as being covered in glass and light grey panels and having a simple, contemporary look. These are useful expressions for describing modern architecture. He also mentions the trees, benches, and lighting around the building, showing that he is not only describing the structure itself, but also the atmosphere it creates. Finally, Finn explains why he likes the building. His reason is not just that it looks good. He connects it with his future plans. He says it represents the kind of place he would like to live in after graduation. This personal connection makes the answer more meaningful because the building becomes a symbol of the lifestyle he wants in the future. Next, we'll hear Blondie's response. She describes a tall building that she dislikes.
I'm going to talk about a high-rise apartment building that was completed about 2 years ago, right next to the metro station near my office. It's mainly a residential building aimed at young professionals who want an easy commute into the city. The ground floor has a few useful businesses like a 24-hour convenience store, a dry cleaner, and a chain coffee shop, while the upper floors are filled with studio and one-bedroom apartments. In terms of appearance, it's not a building I find attractive at all. It's basically a huge dark grey concrete tower with rows of identical windows and balconies from top to bottom. Everything about it feels very uniform and there isn't much greenery around it to make it feel more welcoming. Because it's so tall and boxy, it also blocks a lot of sunlight from the older two-storey shops behind it, which makes that part of the street feel darker than it used to. The main reason I dislike it is that it just feels cold and impersonal. Last year, one of my colleagues was apartment hunting and booked a viewing there, so I went along out of curiosity. Seeing the inside only reinforced my first impression. The corridors were long and narrow. Every floor looked exactly the same. and the apartments felt surprisingly cramped considering how expensive they were. More than anything, I think the building reflects a trend you see in a lot of modern cities. Developers seem more interested in fitting in as many apartments as possible than creating places where people actually enjoy living. Every evening when I leave work, I see streams of residents heading inside, and although I know it's convenient, it just doesn't look like a place with much warmth or character. So, overall, while it serves its purpose well, it's definitely not the kind of building I'd ever choose to live in.
That was Blondie's response. Let's examine how she presents her ideas and supports her opinion about the building. For the first point, what it is used for. Blondie explains that the building is a residential building designed for young professionals. The phrase, aimed at young professionals, is useful because it tells us who the building is designed for. She also adds details about the businesses on the ground floor, which makes the description more complete. For the location, she says, right next to the metro station near my office. This immediately explains why she notices the building regularly. Because it is part of her daily routine, she can naturally give more personal details about it. When describing the appearance, Blondie uses language that clearly shows her negative opinion. For example, a huge dark, grey concrete tower, and rows of identical windows and balconies. These details create a clear image of the building and explain why she finds it unattractive. For the final point, Blondie gives a personal experience. She explains that she visited the building when her colleague was looking for an apartment. This allows her to describe the inside of the building and support her opinion with a real example. She then expands the discussion by connecting the building to a wider issue in modern cities. This gives her answer a stronger conclusion. Now let's look at some useful vocabulary and expressions that you can use when describing tall buildings. Let's start with some useful words for explaining what a building's used for. A residential building is simply a building where people live. For example, the building I'm going to talk about is a residential building mainly occupied by young professionals. A more specific phrase is high-rise apartment block, which refers to a tall building containing many apartments. For example, there are several high-rise apartment blocks in the area because the city has limited space. Another useful expression is mixed-use development. This describes a building or complex that combines different functions, such as apartments, shops, restaurants, and offices. For example, I like the area because there are several mixed-use developments where residents can live, work, and shop in the same place. When describing a tall building, you can use some specific vocabulary related to size. A tower block is another word for a tall apartment or office building. For example, the city's skyline is dominated by modern tower blocks. You can also mention the number of floors or stories. For example, it's a 30-story building located in the centre of the city. When describing apartments inside the building, you can use spacious for a large, comfortable space. For example, the apartments are quite spacious and have plenty of natural light. Or compact for a small but efficiently designed space. For example, the apartments are fairly compact because the building is designed for young professionals. Now let's look at some expressions for describing how a building looks. If you like a building's appearance, you can say it has a sleek and modern design. This means it looks stylish, simple, and up to date. For example, I like the building because it has a sleek and modern design without looking too artificial. A related phrase is minimalist design. This describes a style that uses simple shapes, clean lines, and very few decorative elements. For example, the building has a minimalist design with simple shapes and a lot of glass. You can also mention specific architectural features such as balconies, windows, entrances, or outdoor spaces. For example, one of the building's best architectural features is the rooftop garden. A building is not only about its structure, the surroundings can also influence our opinion. If a building looks clean and cared for, you can describe it as well maintained. For example, although it isn't a new building, it's very well maintained. If there are many plants and trees nearby, you can say it is surrounded by greenery. For example, what I like about the building is that it's surrounded by greenery, which makes the area feel more relaxing. Another useful phrase is sense of community. This refers to the feeling that residents interact and feel connected. For example, the building has shared spaces that help create a stronger sense of community. When you want to explain why you like a building, these expressions can help. Visually appealing means attractive to look at. For example, I think the building is visually appealing because of its simple but elegant design. You can also say that a building blends into the surroundings. This means it matches the environment instead of looking out of place. For example, I like old buildings that blend into the surrounding neighbourhood. Another useful phrase is have a welcoming atmosphere. For example, the entrance area has trees and benches, which gives the building a welcoming atmosphere. If you want to describe a building you dislike, these expressions are useful. A building can lack character, meaning it does not have any unique or interesting qualities. For example, I don't like the building because it lacks character and looks almost identical to many others in the city. A tall building can also look imposing. This means it looks large and powerful, sometimes in an uncomfortable way. For example, the tower looks quite imposing because it blocks the view of the smaller buildings around it. If a place feels unfriendly, you can say it feels cold and impersonal. For example, the inside of the building feels cold and impersonal because everything looks exactly the same. Finally, an eyesore is a building or object that is unpleasant to look at. For example, some people think the new tower is an eyesore because it doesn't match the traditional architecture nearby. So that's it for today's lesson. For more practice, extra lessons, and exclusive content, become a member and get access to more resources. Keep practicing, and I'll see you in the next one.